Nikki, you mentioned something like single country complex before the show. Can you tell me a bit about that?
So, I've spent a lot of time on the road fundraising in the last, 24 months. And every other investor I go to says, oh, we don't invest in single country funds. Okay. So this is a pendulum that I think shifts back and forth. Because when I started my career,
5 years ago. Right?
it was all about, pan-Asia funds. That's what people wanted exposure to. And then kind of it became pan-Asia, and then, but Japan and Korea are different, and then Japan and Korea. And then it's India and China are different. So it kind of swings back and forth, and it depends on which region. I've spent a lot of time in Japan, where Japan's very interested in, single country funds. But in Europe, we're hearing, no, we want to diversify. So that's the single country complex.
So where is the situation at the moment? Is it still very difficult?
It is very challenging. If one is a first-time fund, it's incredibly tough, very, very tough. There have been, a number of funds that just gave up in Vietnam. They were raising for, 24, 30 months and just threw in the towel and said, we're not getting anywhere. And there are some funds who are like on their fourth fund that are still having a tough time raising. And it takes longer too. There was one interesting statistic I came across was the average time to raise a fund used to be 9 months in 2007, and that's increased to 24 months. So that's the kind of difference on how tough it is.
So are you saying that Vietnam needs a different approach? You have to attach Vietnam to the region or a group of markets to be able to raise funds?
Yes, exactly. And that's kind of the twist that I've been using, is to partner with other managers in the region who have a similar problem and try to come to market together. And that gets quite complex because then you're multiplying the number of agreements and things, and just getting consensus is a headache. Yeah.
So what is a logical cluster for Vietnam to be added to?
A logical cluster would be high growth ASEAN. That's where I see a very good fit. Because these are markets, India and China are, I saw recently TPG opened an office in Chongqing. That's how specialized they're getting, So, yeah.
Well, it's a bigger market than Vietnam.
The city itself.
Well, the city almost.
Yeah.
No, but the province certainly.
Yeah.
I don't know what the population is, but it's over 100 million. So, but yeah, I mean, I'd agree with Nikki. I think Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar would be a logical grouping to sit with Vietnam.
In your survey that you published recently as well, Ken, you basically listed some of the key challenges that the investors actually came across in Vietnam. And one of them is the availability of debt finance. Right. And you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, as I said earlier, I think the majority of private equity investments have been funded out of equity or using equity convertible debt instruments, and very little has been financed from bank or third-party borrowing. And of course, at the moment, with borrowing locally with the interest rates the way they are, just doesn't make sense to anybody.
What's the interest rate at the moment?
Well, for an SME, you're talking about 20% a year.
Plus additional fees very often that the banks want to charge you, which of course they shouldn't be charging, but they do. So it can be anything from, I think, 19% up to 25%. To borrow internationally, of course, that's very, very difficult. State Bank is getting more restrictive on foreign currency borrowings, particularly from overseas. If you're an investor and you're able to borrow overseas and putting in as shareholders' funds, but by way of loan, that's okay. But it's very difficult without giving, corporate guarantees to be able to access that debt as well. And if you're only a minority shareholder, you don't want to be guaranteeing the loans for the whole entity.
The other thing I'd add to what Ken is saying is, the lack of cash flow lending in Vietnam. This is a big issue because everything in Vietnam is, asset-based lending where it's collateralized. You don't really see any. So, I think we're decades away, I'd say, until that kicks in. And you really need that, to have an efficient capital structure and leverage your equity.
But despite all the challenges, let's talk a bit about some positive notes for Vietnam, because the show is about positive Vietnam.
Right. Well, you see, that's the problem when you talk to expats about Vietnam. It tends to switch into negative, and it's not that we are negative, right? We're here, which means we're not negative. And I've been here for 21 years, and that's not because they won't let me out, right? No, I mean, the fundamentals of Vietnam haven't changed. The macroeconomic situation's changed. We've got high inflation, we've got high interest rates, but the basic fundamentals of a high growth economy, a big population, very young population, and a population that is very willing to learn and easy to teach, speaks a lot for the country, and that's why it's still attractive to foreign investors.
Is Vietnam still attractive?
That's why I moved here. From Thailand, when the headhunters approached me, I have a tool, a kit that I use to check out a country's fundamentals. And basically, I used to use this to compare markets in a certain sector across the region, because before I did regional private equity. And what I'd use would be called S-curves. And basically, all an S-curve is, you take a product and you see its penetration by country based on their GDP per capita. So you can actually plot out, for example, financial services. How will the credit card sector evolve? Or how will milk consumption evolve? How will the pharmaceutical sector evolve? So basically the per capita consumption, and across all of these S-curves, what I noticed is Vietnam's in a very early stage, and in many of them it's approaching what's also called the Louisian turning point. Have you heard that expression? Kind of where there's an acceleration. So it's an S-curve and there's a sharp slope. So in many sectors, Vietnam's in that area. So from a fundamentals point of view, I think it's fantastic.
Luxury cars hit that.
Okay.
12 months
oh yes. And then the tax man came down on them. Yeah.
So if we put Vietnam into regional perspective, how is Vietnam's ranking in your perspective in comparison to other markets?
Okay. I think alongside Indonesia, it is one of the most attractive emerging markets in the world on a decade basis.
No, I'd agree with that. I'd agree with that. I think it's more attractive than Philippines. It's more attractive than, I still think it's more attractive than Indonesia, although a lot of fund managers would disagree because of political stability. More attractive from Thailand for similar reasons. More attractive than Malaysia. And obviously much more developed than Cambodia, Laos and Myanmar. So, I think Vietnam's right up there.
So would you say more allocated fund for Vietnam in the years to come?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And I would imagine a lot of strategic interest too.
Yeah.
And there'll be constant battles between the strategic and the financial investors.
Right.
What about the types of investors looking into Vietnam? Would that be changed, or the same profile of investors like before?
I think it'll get more mainstream. Vietnam's been kind of looked at, before. It's been hard to invest in Vietnam. I mean, if for a foreigner to come and open even a brokerage account, the procedures they have to go through, it's almost like telling them, hey, don't come. They make it that hard. But I think it'll get more mainstream. It was kind of more frontier investors, more kind of, individuals, etc. And now it's going to become more mainstream over time. So we're seeing pension funds come in now.
Right. And I think we'll see more strategic investors coming in, more trade buyers.
What about the sectors that would be invested in the years to come? Do you think it will be the same, or will there be differences?
It'll depend on how the sectors are performing in the economy here. So, at some stage in the future, real estate will become a popular sector to invest in again. I'm not saying when that'll be, but And as education gets more populated with schools and different educational groups investing into schools and higher education, obviously that will start to tail off.
But for the immediate future, say 2012 to 2015, what do you say? What do you forecast for Vietnam?
Just what I've been observing, and Ken, maybe you've picked this up too, is moving. There's been a certain segment that's been moving up the value chain. You're seeing kind of the Intel types coming in and set up plants. You're seeing a lot of the Japanese, like Canon, and the Koreans like Samsung coming in. So it's not just, yes, we're going to have a lot of that growth in footwear and in garments, etc., but we're also having it in, this kind of higher
end manufacturing. And I think we'll continue to see investment in education and healthcare infrastructure, and I think we'll start to see something which I think should have happened a long time ago, much more investment into agriculture.
Yes, I would totally agree with that.
Particularly from Japanese companies as well, I think.
The whole agribusiness theme is one that's, finally sinking in. People are, awakening to the fact that, we're going to have a population of 10 billion by 2050. The arable land per capita is falling fast. Soil quality is, reducing. And, there's going to be a lot of investments in agribusiness.
When you mention agriculture, what do you talk about? Is it rice, coffee, vegetables? What is it in agriculture that's getting the attention at the moment?
Well, I think it's adding value to the agricultural sector products.
Processing.
It's processing and packaging, but also supply of things like vegetables, food security. I mean, that's why I think there's a lot of interest from Japan at the moment. It's post-tsunami, post-radiation scare that they're starting to look at investing overseas into supply of agricultural products.
So more on branding agricultural products of Vietnam than farming and production?
Well, I think you're going to see, how can I say, improvement in the technologies used in farming and production. So you're going to see higher yields. But of course, that's going to require a major change away from small holdings and small farming to larger scale, almost back to cooperative type farming.
So is there the expectation from your side about any improvement from the government in terms of legal environment in the future for private equity investment to develop?
I earlier mentioned about the Offshore Fund Managers Association, which has kind of been lobbying, various ministries to try to, make the playing field more level, as well as giving more specific ideas that could be helpful. And I think that the government's receptive to that, and encourages foreign investment, needs foreign investment, and so I think over time it will evolve. What does concern me now, I might be going back to the challenges here, is the fast changing regulatory environment here. And one sector we're seeing this in is the banking sector. Almost every day and definitely every week, we're seeing what I would consider pretty significant shifts in regulation. And as an investor, I would feel more comfortable for there to be less regulatory change. It creates too much uncertainty. So I'm sure they'll get there eventually. I just hope that they're not too erratic along the way.
Well, I think by and large the government as a whole recognise what needs to be done. It's a question of practically how quickly you can do it, how quickly you can implement change, how quickly you can get people to adapt to change and to be trained in the professional skills that are needed to implement that change. I see, generally speaking, not like the change in banking regulations every day or week, but I think generally changing the regulatory environment is positive, because Vietnam started with basically nothing other than the civil code. So they've made tremendous progress in the last 20 years in terms of the legal and regulatory environment. And also, they're never afraid to admit that they made a mistake in passing certain regulations and being prepared to amend regulations. I think it's also encouraging that, by and large, we do see more consultation with foreign organisations, with foreign business groups, with foreign lawyers, on draft laws and regulations that the government's considering bringing into force. So I think all that is positive, but there's still, the tendency to have these knee-jerk reactions and to do things quickly, if that's possible in Vietnam. I mean, things sometimes do happen quickly, and they normally happen quickly when there's a major problem or a major crisis. Things do happen quickly and get decided quickly, but it's a shame that things can't get decided a little bit quicker when there's no crisis, right?
Well, we've discussed the challenges and the opportunities for private equity investment in Vietnam. My last question to you both is, to the investing community out there watching the show, what would be your personal advice to them in terms of private equity investment in Vietnam?
Okay, well, if they're foreign investors, they're slightly different than to local investors. But I presume to foreign investors, as you had asked us earlier, I would say is be patient, first of all. Things take a lot longer here than elsewhere. The second thing I would say is be practical. You don't have a kind of legal environment that you can fall back on and, again, structure yourself around for protection. And finally, I would add that, try to take a more humane approach to the human side of investing. Invest in relationships. Don't be pushy. Don't bang your fist on the boardroom table too much, and you should be fine.
Right. I like that. Well, Nikki mentioned 2 Ps. I was going to mention the 3 Ps: patience, patience, and patience. But look, I think there are great opportunities in Vietnam. It's a market that should be taken and deserves to be taken seriously. There are pitfalls and challenges along the way, but there's a lot of good local knowledge available, and people are very willing to share that knowledge. And don't make the mistake that lots of investors have made, and I refer to it as leaving common sense at the airport when they arrive, right? Because it's surprising the number of companies or individuals that will make decisions here that they'd never make anywhere else in the world, because there's this desire to do something in Vietnam. Vietnam, once you get under the skin of it, or it gets under your skin, it becomes a very, very compelling opportunity, right? And sometimes I think the desire to fulfill the opportunity, people make decisions that, and sometimes don't make logical decisions. They leave part of their logic at the airport.
All right, on that note of common sense, thank you very much for participating in the show today. Patience and common sense have certainly been emphasized by our guest speakers today. If you're looking to Vietnam as a destination for private equity investment, if you have questions for the show or for the panelists, please send them to phi@insightvietnam.com.vn. For past episodes and show updates, please visit Insight Vietnam on WordPress, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. I hope today's show has opened up new investment opportunities for you into Vietnam. And even though challenges exist, Vietnam is certainly not the only emerging market that calls for patience. On that note, I wish you all peace and clarity in your chosen investment path. Remember, I'm always here to help. Bye for now and see you in 2 weeks.